Chapter 3. A Series of Unfortunate Events. Liz loved it here. Everything in Tylersville was so stereotypically American. She woke up every day since the move with a smile on her face, eager to see which new peculiarities she could discover before nightfall. The food was enormous. People drove pickup trucks. Every house was bright and beautiful, with a front porch and separated from its neighbors by at least 10 meters. She still missed home, of course, but most of the essential British comforts were still available to her. There was a foreign marketplace up on Sullivan Street. Nearly half the store was filled with Canadian goods. A large maple leaf flag wove boldly outside the front entrance. But there was a sizable section for German, Japanese, and British imports, on top of numerous other aisles for other cultures. Still able to find Jaffa cakes and ginger snaps across the pond, her only homesickness came from finding a suitable time to call her parents, since Wyoming sat 7 hours behind. It was her mother that made the biggest fuss after her brother had died. They had never lived in Camp Mountbatten to begin with. Her entire life up to just a week ago had been spent in Ely, but with her parents' opinions on life in Orkney soured, a solution was reached in sending Liz away. They considered plenty of options. France seemed easiest as it was so close, as was Norway, but the language barrier ultimately turned her off the idea. South Asia was a less orthodox answer, but she already spoke a fine amount of Urdu, and there lived a notable British minority there, but the culture shock became a topic of contention for her white father. That left the 4 English-speaking cities. Australia and New Zealand was simply too far away. She let her parents be the ones to admit that aloud, but she felt the exact same. Canada was their preferable option, but upon reading about the Northwest Territories, Liz became vocal about her disinterest in a sunless winter abroad. Finally, a solution was reached in a 3-way agreement with her family, the British Embassy, and the American one. She was to be granted limited exposure to conflict amongst the rest of her squad mates, regardless of the mission. To see this through, they placed her alongside the Prime Minister's daughter, who was also starting her service years. Would she have preferred to be with a squad of other foreigners? Probably, though this option almost guaranteed her safety. The Prime Minister would have the final say over his daughter's whereabouts, and this nearly certified that whatever happened to her brother would not happen again. Liz couldn't yet tell how she felt about the others. The one she knew best was their missions leader, Xander, who came across like a stereotypical blue-collar American. Every single time she'd seen him, he was wearing a different ripped baseball cap, and more than once outfitted in a plaid jumper and blue jeans. With the way he talked and certain phrases he used, even in meetings, she got the distinct impression he had been unlikely to vote for Barack Obama. From what she could gather about the locals, the 2 girls and 2 boys had each grown up together as adopted siblings, though the girls did not refer to themselves as sisters the way the boys called themselves brothers. So far, Emma had been the kindest. Despite Liz's hesitations toward the nepo baby of the group, Emma appeared not to let the attention go to her head, and seemed to take an interest in Liz's comforts as a new part of the squad. On 2 occasions, she had been invited to eat with her and Johnny, though not wanting to feel like a burden, Liz had declined. There were simply other things she wanted to see and do without needing to force conversations for half an hour. Johnny was seemingly less kind. He seemed taken aback by her declining of an invitation to Sunday church, though having overheard how Kent responded to a similar invite, Liz thought her assertion of, "No, I'm British," was both polite and satisfactory. She initially thought him prude the way he shunned the other boys for their language at the bowling alley, but having watched his bizarre moments of self-exile, constantly reading on his phone and avoiding anyone else, wondered if he, like her younger brother Dallin, might be somewhere on the spectrum. Jordan and Margot had paid her little notice. Despite feigned interest in her background when they met, the initial hope that Margot, another foreigner, might allow her a common ally, the pair had been glued to one another, quite literally, since Xander had left the squad alone. Liz had come downstairs the first night, hoping to make late-night kippers, but discovered them locking lips rather aggressively on the community couch. Unable to take her attention away, she found herself entranced by the affair for an uninterrupted 5 minutes, by which time her appetite had completely changed. Last in the squad was Kent. A shy boy she thought was a bit cute, he seemed to want very little to do with her, despite her best attempts at socializing. She thought the pair might be able to collaborate on decorating their secluded upstairs landing, but his vulgarity in response to her invitation was to watch Doctor Who, and gave her the stinging impression he was having a far worse time adjusting to life in Tylersville than she was. Trying to avoid refreshing her disappointment over the weekend's episode, Liz woke the next morning excited about the new day. American school was unexplored territory, and she was most enchanted by the lack of uniform dress code. For the first time in her life, she was allowed to dress like herself for school. Jumping in the shower and doing her best to flatten her nest of hair, the prospect of doing her makeup her own way gave Liz more butterflies in her stomach than any boy could possibly provide. Her usual assortment of textured jeans was overlaid by a navy top adorned with the face of Jimi Hendrix. Far too warm for sleeves, she covered her arms with a handful of colored wristbands before slipping into a pair of Chuck Taylors and making her way downstairs. Emma was already cooking. With her room on the stove, She joined the girls' cacophony of pancakes and bacon with a set of eggs, and the pair sat down together with Johnny, who exited his own room dressed in a green top reading State of Hockey, and still the scraps of Emma's leftover cooking. "Coffee?" she offered. No thanks, Liz declined. "Thought I'd run up to the Starbucks on Radford before class." Emma grinned, perhaps finding it humorous that the British girl would prefer a capitalist import over something homemade. Liz couldn't find the confidence to admit that her affection for the cute boy she expected to see behind the counter. "Mind if I turn on the news?" Johnny asked. With no verbal decline, he switched on the telly across the room and followed along intently with something about an election in Poland. When she had finished her eggs, Liz announced her departure from the common room. Down below in the building lobby, she was surprised to see how few students seemed to be up and about at this hour. Sure, there were still 45 minutes to go before the start of the school day, but she figured the excitement of a new year would make the others, like herself, eager to make their way to the school. A 10-minute walk up the street brought her close to the shopping center, and down a couple of blocks to the south, a shop front with the familiar green and white siren hosted a line of young people nearly bursting through the door. An additional 10 minutes was spent waiting in said line, with Liz beginning to worry that she might actually be late for her first day. The worry evaded when the tall, lanky boy behind the counter processed her order, and her stress seemed to completely melt away. He must have been in uni, or at least of that age, but he was by far the youngest of the crew behind the counter. Watching him intently and completely forgetting her rush to return to the students' mall, Liz was snapped back to stress upon realizing there were only 20 minutes until the opening bell once she left the store. Speed-walking eastward, the sun blazing in her eyes over the distant ridge, she found herself sooner than expected back in the great grassy circle which hosted the student affairs. Where the northwestern edge of the circle held the white tower where they lived, the southern side hosted a sprawling 3-story complex emboldened with the words Truman High School on the windowless left side of the front doors. Beside the large stone steps now crowded with a sea of students, 3 flags drifted lullingly from their enormous poles, in what Liz only now realized was the calmest day she could remember since her arrival in the city. Highest and largest flew the Star-Spangled Banner. Beside it, the familiar blue, white, and green tricolor of the IREA, and lastly, a white buffalo on a blue background that she had recently learned was the state flag of Wyoming. Joining the ruckus of pedestrians, she followed almost every single one to the right side of the entryway, where 2 wings of classrooms jutted out sideways from a massive rectangular great hall. Having toured the school in the first couple days of her arrival, she maneuvered her way to the right wing and remained on the first floor. In the second classroom on the left, seated in oak desks lined in 3 columns of 4, she found Johnny and Emma chatting with Jordan and Margot, who were still gripping their hands tightly as they prepared to be separated for life. "Hey!" Emma welcomed when they all turned their attention to Liz. "We saved you a spot." She took the chair behind Emma, which sat in the center back of the classroom. Setting her bag atop the yellow-flaked carpet, she noticed 6 strangers taking brief notice of them before returning to their own conversations, surmising that this must be the other squad with whom they shared their first hour. Still absent from the room was their teacher. So was Kent. Just before a digital bell sounded from the ceiling to mark the top of the hour, a rectangular woman no older than 40 came waltzing through the door, a stack of papers gripped mercilessly in her right hand. "Good morning," she called, receiving a pair of unenthusiastic responses. As the bell sounded, a blur of red belted through the door and froze to a halt just before colliding with the far wall. Bag half opened, his hair uncombed, and realizing himself that his shirt was inside out, Kent looked nervously around the class, now the obvious center of the 12 others' attentions. Before he could catch his breath to say a word, Jordan piped up. "Nice work, speedster." Kent huffed, his face threatening to match his blank shirt. Alarm didn't go off." "You're fine," said their instructor, gesturing to the only remaining desk which sat next to Haz at the front of the room. Kent hustled to the spot, realizing the other 6 strangers also staring in his direction. Introducing herself as Mrs. Dennis, the teacher took attendance, which was more to allow the other 12 to get to know one another, since they were all obviously there. To the class's horror, she then passed out a pop quiz, though she promised there would be no grade given, simply wanting to assess their incoming knowledge relating to the basic algebra. Suffering through the next hour, all 12 of them appeared relieved to be leaving maths. Even Johnny, who should have had it easy, admitted there were a couple of concepts he should have paid closer attention to in order to memorize. The other squad split from theirs and headed for the science wing, while the 6 of them huddled together and scuttled their way to the exact opposite end of the school. The building was divided into 4 rough parts. On the westernmost side were the 2 classroom wings, one containing classrooms and labs for various sciences, and the other hosting things like maths, language, and history. Immediately east of this was the massive Great Hall, which each time Liz had been through was set up in the form of a school cafeteria. It was the full 3 floors high, with balconies hanging over the western wall for quick access between the 2 classroom wings. On the back wall, a large curtain of windows allowed light to bounce off the large barren hill into which the school was nestled. Not a very pleasant view, but it made the space feel less institutional so long as the sun was up. On the opposite wall was the school kitchen, which sat next to the administrative and counselor's offices. The last wall, through which came the entrance area and access to the other half of the school, was emblazoned with an enormous vertical flag, overshadowing the numerous other banners which read the title years for various international sports and activities. On the other side of this wall sat the 1,000-seat auditorium, which stood as the centerpiece of the school's third section, the arts wing. Most of the classrooms for arts and music were in the basement, so one could easily walk the length of the school without realizing there were any arts programs at all. The same could not be said about the athletics department. 3 separate facilities sat one after another down the easternmost hallway. Nearest the entrance was the swimming pool, next the gym, and lastly a large ice rink. The entire length of the hallway was adorned with physical evidence of the cafeteria banners. Hundreds of pictures, rosters, signed balls, and trophies wrestled for the front of a nearly 3-deep glass case. Down below, in addition to the regular fitness locker rooms, each individual team had a designated dressing area. When the squad reached the entrance to the binary locker rooms, Liz followed Margot and Emma as they split from the boys. She had been worried this would not be the case, since so much of their missions work was all together as a squad. In the massive maze of lockers alongside dozens of other girls, the trio found an alcove to themselves, where all 3 of their names were stamped in alphabetic succession into the front of successive cages. Upon opening the lockers, Liz felt a tightness in her stomach. Hanging inside, a set of black leggings, a red wicking shirt, and a set of trainers reminded her just how out of place she was going to feel when it came to physical activity. Even worse, she quickly noticed that the shirts in the other lockers were not red, but navy, and turning it over, she realized why. With the name Granhook screened onto the back nameplate above the large numbers 3006, the front was blank, save for the left breast, over which a Union flag sat above fine white print reading United Kingdom. The other shirts were formatted the same, but with the plain blue front heralded by the too familiar American flag and the words United States. When the 3 began to change, Liz nearly began to cry. Stifling her volume so only Emma seemed to notice, she came to regret the plaid boxers she had worn as pants. Margot confidently stepped out of her own shorts, not even recognizing the others there, nor that the other 2 were both staring at her exposed rear, outfitted in only the scantest of black thongs. To Liz's bare comfort, Emma seemed intimidated as well, her face nearing the shade of her own shirt. As though defying her own thoughts, Emma pulled off her own clothes and pretended not to notice the other 2, and flexing her abdomen for good measure, which to her credit was far more defined than Margot's. Comforted by the minuscule size of Emma's chest, Liz was encouraged enough to take off her own clothes and redress into the leggings and shirt, though this confidence was stifled upon the realization that her wristbands would have to go, leaving her pasty arms exposed for everyone to see. 5 minutes after they had arrived, the ordeal was over, and now redressed in their fitness attire, the girls rejoined the boys in the lower hallway and walked together onto the wooden basketball floor. Well over 100 students were huddled near the center of the arena. While nearly all were in the American Navy, Liz noticed a handful of other colors of the rainbow too, making her feel a bit less exposed. Though she was the only one she could spot with the Union over her breast, another pair of red shirts also read United Kingdom, though to her relish, the flag above was the tricolour of Ireland. In the back, a trio of skinny Japanese girls were dressed in all white. Elsewhere, she counted one of each of the light blue of France, the green of Australia and Mexico, a German boy in black, and a bright blue shirt with a Caribbean flag she did not recognize. A few different colors for the various regions of Africa, and about 15 matching red shirts adorned with the maple leaf flag of Canada. Despite the large number of kids who would no doubt see her fail at some kind of sport over the remaining hour, she was relieved to see Xander, who was not in his usual plaid and cap, but instead in a matching navy polo and tan trousers. His exposed hair was not in fact balding, as she had suspected, but a light brown cut into an overgrown military style. Like other squad leaders, he ushered them aside from the large swarm and checked their outfits to make sure everything was in order and fit properly. The large group was in fact 4 separate fitness classes, all of different ages. Divided into their freshman class, the squad, along with 3 others, remained in the gym to be led by a man called Coach Della, whose thinning hair and eyebrows were so blonde, Liz initially thought him clean-shaven. To her further surprise, his strained voice was not gruff and masculine, but instead voiceless and high-pitched, as though he had been yelling instructions for the better part of a century. "Today we're going easy on you," he shouted from the back of his throat. Liz would be surprised if Xander could make out his words from the far back, where he stood in conversation with the other 3 missions leaders. "We'll get into the heavier stuff toward the end of this week," he continued. "Weight training, endurance tests, that sort of thing. For now, we'll be starting simple. Dodgeball." He pointed to a set of white foam balls in the corner of the gym. A wave of whispering circled through the group, which died down as he continued talking, though 2 voices behind Liz kept on in hushed conversation. "Now, I'll separate you by squads," Della instructed. "Williams and Hansen's group, you headed the north wall. Grainer and Xander, you guys on the south. Do you need me to separate you?" Liz realized this last question was not an instruction but a warning, as she and 20 others spun around to follow Della's line of sight. The continued whispering had come from Jordan and Margot, who, despite still holding hands, seemed to be arguing about something. "No, sir," they both replied in turn. "In your own time," he perpetuated, and Jordan quickly shot his hand away from Margot's, which appeared to bother her profusely. Della continued with brief instructions, the usual rules about the game, while also alerting the squads to a ban on effects during the game. Liz wondered if such a rule would bother Kent, who had appeared eager to show off his effect after Jordan's Friday challenge. Instead, he remained quiet and suppressed, taking in the remainder of the instructions and following the rest of them peacefully when they split into the two sides. The game turned out to be rather forgettable. As she expected, she was the first one out from their squad, though she managed to last longer than 4 others from their side of center. To her surprise, she was followed soon after by Jordan, who, standing as the tallest target on their team, failed to catch either of a pair of balls, which ricocheted off either shoulder. Kent did well despite the limitations, taking an unlucky bounce under his nose, resulting in Jordan's return to the floor before eventually succumbing to a shot atop his foot. Her surprise was greatest, however, when the last left on their side was Margot. Despite her long frame, Liz had not expected her much of an athlete, though she was quickly shown otherwise when she challenged the remaining 4 across with the grace of a gazelle. Managing to shrink the field to 2, the task proved too great, failing to avoid a ball behind her back and double dribbling it in frustration. The awkwardness of the first time out of the way, redressing was far less psychologically taxing after class than before. Having enough time for a brief shower, where she did her best to avoid having to redo her makeup, the squad reunited for a walk back in the direction of maths, making their way to the second floor for history. An enormous bald man stood with his back to the class, writing a series of years on the board, his body so muscular it hardly fit in his black sleeveless jumper. Liz was surprised to see him on this side of the cafeteria, rather than teaching alongside Coach Della. When the bell rang and all 12 of the class's students found their way to respective seats, he turned around energetically and began a whirlwind of words in a staccato Midwestern accent. "Good morning," he hollered, not seeming to register that the class were all running low on energy just before lunchtime and that half had just come from the gym. "My name," he turned to the board and underlined his name at the top, "is Mr. Andre. Now, a question to start us off." He turned to the back of the class. "Who among us has spent their entire life in Tylersville?" There was a long hesitation, but 2 kids from the other squad raised their hands. Noticing that the girls looked rather similar, Liz deduced that they must be fraternal twins. "The Hendersons!" Andre shouted excitedly, double-checking his list of names to reassure himself. "Which of you is Allie?" The 2 girls looked at each other. The one with the shorter hair spoke. "I'm Allie," she mumbled. "She's Addie." "Wonderful," Andre continued to grin. "I'm going to do my best to remember. Now, your father works in weapons design and manufacturing, does he not?" The girls neither confirmed nor denied the question. "And I'm guessing that's why you've been here the whole time." Again, there was no response, but confused staring. Andre continued without skipping a beat. "I, like most of you, grew up outside Tylersville. My mother was a non-member, a Polish immigrant from Wrocław, and my dad, who was American, had left the program to work a financial gig in Chicago. And so, I spent the first 7 years of my life in a small town called Peoria, Illinois. Now, we don't need your full story, and don't hesitate to skip places you've jumped between, but just out of curiosity, where are the rest of you from?" He gestured over to their side of the room first, where Johnny sat in front. "Minneapolis, Minnesota," he stated assuredly, as though expecting the question. Emma continued. "Houston, Texas." Then Jordan. "Tallahassee, Florida." And around the room they went, like taking attendance, while a few others in the room popped their heads curiously when Liz said Cambridge, England. Andre hadn't seemed to even notice, continuing to circle around the room indiscriminately until the last boy in front said, "Memphis, Tennessee," with a rather odd accent. "Excellent," Andre shouted. "Now, what this should show you all is that despite all of our different backgrounds and upbringings, no matter how far we may come to be a part of this association, we are all linked by a collective history, and it's that very history that we will be studying in this class. Now, I want you all to head over to the bookshelf on the back wall, grab a book, make sure to write your name on the inside cover, and open it to page 15. Despite their teacher's best efforts and enthusiasm in his voice, as soon as the class began reading, the energy was completely sucked from the room. The stale air discussing the origins of radioactive chemistry was broken only by the occasional rumbling of stomachs. Even Emma, who had earlier voiced her passion for history and anticipation for the class, seemed far more focused on the upcoming meal than anything on the page. When the masterful sound of the bell finally rang, the class could not have been quicker out the door. Though their backs were weighed down with a 5-pound book, the squad, along with the others from history, found themselves among the first in line for the second lunch period. Plastered across both announcement screens and the menu boards was the phrase Philly Saturday, and upon reaching the heart of the kitchen, Liz learned exactly what this meant. A stereotypical cheesesteak loaded with optional mushrooms and sauerkraut stood as the main course for the first day lunch. Beyond this, sides of soft pretzels, cakes, and other pastries sat out on smaller plates for students to take. There was an additional full-service salad bar, a pizzeria, and a soup station, the last of which served French onion as its soup of the day to match the Philadelphia aesthetic. Again, Liz was glad she chose the United States. She followed the squad to a round table near the middle of the cavernous room. Emma and Margot appeared to eye a set of other friends at other tables, waving and shouting brief hellos, but both remained with the group as they sat alone at a table outfitted for 8. Every single one of them dug into their sandwich before a word had even been uttered. After a satisfactory series of bites, it was Jordan who broke the silence first. "What do you think so far?" he voiced with his mouth still half full. Margot shot him an annoyed glance. He seemed to direct this at the general group, but his eyes were on Kent. "Who? Me?" Kent stuttered in reply. "Anybody." Jordan swallowed, averting his eyes. "Bored the hell out of me," Liz claimed. "Wish it wasn't right before lunch," Emma said apologetically. "Andrew said Andre was the best teacher he's ever had." Before Liz could be refreshed on who Andrew was, Emma piped, "Speak the devil." If Liz thought Jordan was a bit arrogant, he was nothing compared to the boy who sat down next to Emma. Ruffling his sister's hair with one hand and plopping his overstuffed plates down with the other, the family resemblance was impossible to miss. With layered blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a full but well-trimmed beard, Andrew looked as though someone pulled Emma's skin over Jordan's frame, though this boy had more muscle and maturity in his figure, and for a moment she wondered if he hadn't failed a few levels to still be in secondary. To his other side was a smaller but equally muscular black boy, who held his hand out to Kent for a fist bump, though retracted it when Kent failed to recognize it. "How's my favorite freshman?" he spat to his sister's obvious annoyance. "Johnny? What's good?" Johnny was attempting to take a sip of water, but the liquid was almost refusing to follow the laws of physics and spilled toward his mouth. After an irritated glance, Andrew released his tensed fingers and the water splashed Johnny in the face. "Andrew!" Emma grudged, more vexed than surprised. "Have to haze a little," her brother coaxed. "First day can't be too easy." "How's Andre?" the other boy asked. A collective eye roll circled the table. "I thought you said he was the best," Emma argued. "As if you're hungover half the time," Andrew sighed. "Who'd you have for fitness?" "Della," Johnny and Jordan said together. "Big Mike," Andrew laughed. "He's the nation ball coach. Hope you made a good impression on him." "Not sure how much losing in dodgeball has to do with our tryout chances," Jordan retorted. "More than you think," replied the other boy, Andrew's mouth temporarily stuffed with a pretzel. "You're not going out this year?" asked Johnny. "After he benched me in the second against Russia?" "Screw that," Andrew's friend added. "Plus, we have more time to work on other things." "Like what?" Emma pondered cautiously. Andrew shot a quick glance at his friend. "Homecoming King looks pretty good on a college app," he said tentatively, shooting a look at Johnny. "Sam's parents are headed to the Maldives in a few weeks. Figured we'd put something together to boost our chances." The other boy, who Liz assumed was the Sam in question, also shot a look at Johnny. "That a problem, John?" Johnny did not appear eager to talk, instead keeping his head down and finishing the last of his sandwich. "He won't say anything," Jordan assured. "When is homecoming this year?" Liz packed up attentively. It was a question she'd been curious to ask, too. 10th, said Sam. "Against Germany." "Who booked that?" Jordan raged in response. "We're going to get slaughtered." "That's my birthday," Johnny mumbled. Nobody else seemed to hear. "I wouldn't be so sure," Andrew argued. "Closey's graduated and Gruber got his legs blown off in Bosnia. Only real threat left is that keeper. What was his name?" "Schrader," Sam assisted. "Should be in decent shape," Andrew bragged. "Even without your star seniors." Emma rolled her eyes again. "How's our brother doing?" Andrew continued. Emma's face reddened slightly. "Didn't care to ask him?" she huffed. "Didn't think he'd answer," he admitted. "Margot probably knows." Margot sat up. Jordan's arm returned to its resting place behind her. "Not a peep," she declined. "Shame," Andrew ended, turning his attention to her and Jordan. "I see Jordy finally pulled the trigger." Both he and Margot turned red as well. "About time," teased Sam. "When's your turn?" He gestured between Emma and Johnny. "Screw off," Emma huffed, clearly not being the first time they had had this proposed. "How about him?" Sam gestured to Kent. "He's cute." "You're the new one, right?" Andrew forced. "What's your name?" Kent did not answer. His face, now redder than the catsup bottle at the center of the table, was looking at Emma for help. "That's enough," she said politely. You know, Em, her brother urged, there's no shame in coming out to your family and friends. She said that's enough. The words were not shouted, but spoken so forcefully a number of tables around them turned to see their source. Johnny dug his knife-like eyes into the pair, and the boys seemed to understand that the damage had been done. With one last bite of an apple, Andrew stood up, and so did Sam. Well, he stretched, I suppose it's time to see where Isla ran off to. The boys lifted their still full plates and began to walk away. Don't forget to vote when the time comes. Fat chance of that, Liz thought. The empty table sat in a sort of stunned silence for the remainder of the hour. Kent and Emma appeared to lose their appetites, though it was the latter who came out of lunch looking the least bothered by her brother's appearance. At the end of the hour, the six filed over to the third floor of the science wing, where an elderly little man called Mr. Kelster droned through yet more nonsense regarding the class syllabus and his expectations for them in and out of the biology lab. The last class of the day was around the balcony to the language wing, where a plump, white-haired Scotswoman called Mrs. McLeish was elated to find another student from across the pond. You ever been to Aberdeen, Miss Granhook? She said in a now more pronounced accent. No, Liz replied. Never north of Glasgow. I'm from Ely. I thought you were from Cambridge, Johnny muttered. Tomato, tomato, Mrs. McLeish argued, overhearing before continuing back to finish the hour discussing the basic forms of Romance verb conjugation. At last, the end of the day bell dismissed them from the building, and the six found themselves at the very back of a 1,000-person herd, trampling across the circular lawn to the training center at the ring's eastern edge. Nestled into a separate hill, the training center was an enormous hexagonal dome, which looked as though it had been teleported straight from the Eden Project. Curious as to how several hundred students could possibly fit and separately train in such a building, Liz found her question answered when, upon entering the great square entry area, she saw the training floor dropped 3 stories below them in a massive, multi-cantilevered course. Surrounded on all sides by an incalculable number of decimeter-sized cubes, the training floor had to be over a half-kilometer in diameter. By some science she did not understand, each of these cubes was programmed to take the rough shape of nearly any obstacle imaginable, be it the walls of a building, a tree, or to her awestruck fascination, a moving bulldozer. Each cube appeared capable of independent movement and function, so long as it remained in contact with another cube. Most impressive in practice by the sudden appearance of a large crevasse in the building's floor, which quickly filled with actual water and became a fully functioning stream. Liz was snapped from her amazement by Jordan, who called her name and made her aware of the fact that the others were leaving down the nearest set of stairs. Jogging to catch up, she followed as they made their way down to the very base of the building. Encircling the training floor was a massive circle of doors along the outer edge, not dissimilar from their living space. Another door plastered with the squad number led to a small classroom, inside which Xander sat working in one of 7 tables, encircling a tall pyramid-like structure between the small desks. Hey! He straightened alertly when they entered. Go on and get dressed through there. We won't be doing anything crazy today, so just something athletic and casual is fine. At the opposite end of the room was another door. Xander returned to his tablet, while Johnny led the 6 of them through to the other side. Inside, Liz felt like she was about to suit up at Wembley. Whereas the locker rooms at the school had felt just like that, this confined space felt more professional and elitist than any Liz had ever seen. The dark blue walls were illuminated by white lights emanating from the underside of a translucent star on the otherwise black ceiling. The floor was carpeted in a dark gray speckled with blue and red in a way that matched Jordan's hair. The back wall opened to a dark stone washroom and shower area, and on each side of the room between the 2 doors were an uneven combination of 7 locker stalls. To call these lockers would require a demotion of the term from those in the school locker rooms. Each of the 7 here were made of brightly polished oak rather than caged metal. Every one was nearly a meter wide, with a thick, comfortable black pad situated at chair height atop the lower shoe cabinet for them to sit and change. They were also nearly a meter deep as well, allowing a number of shirts, jackets, and various other garments to be hung on black hooks without impeding the personal space of the dresser. Above this, a top cubby held what appeared to be a sort of helmet, with a series of visors and eyepieces which Liz hoped they would not need to wear anytime soon. Beside this was an open safe for valuables, the code printed kindly on the inside of the steel door. Each of their names was plastered over a luminescent plaque atop each stall in what seemed to be a random order. When they all found their respective stalls, Kent, who was situated between Johnny and Margot, grabbed a white vest and a pair of black shorts and began to head toward the washroom. Don't be a pussy, change in here, Jordan snarked. Johnny shot him a look. Kent looked taken aback. What? In front of the girls? You're supposed to, said Emma, who sounded as though she'd prefer the alternative. You'll be changing in front of them overseas, Jordan added. Might as well get used to it. Returning to his spot, his face reddening for the nth time that day, Kent waited for any of the others to undress before him. To Liz's surprise, it was Johnny that broke the hesitation, revealing an absolutely welded frame under his green shirt. As if in competition, Kent pulled off his own, revealing a tan rectangular frame that was far less detailed than the others. A line of hair darker than that on his head spread downward from his navel into parts unknown. Turning her back to the group, Liz found herself more comfortable there than she had earlier when it was just the girls. She knew the boys were staring, but perhaps it was knowing that their attention was almost certainly on the other two, specifically Margot, that made her feel that much less exposed. Tossing on a new pair of black leggings and a black strapped shirt of her own, she sat and waited for the couple still unfinished before they all returned to Xander in the classroom. He started their training session with small talk, asking about their individual days before showing them around the tablets stood atop each of the desks. Logging into a virtual missions hub and giving them a tour of the framework, he then used a remote to switch on the pyramid thing in the center. Like a sort of beacon, a three-dimensional projection shot out of the top, and Liz found herself looking at a globe, with 30-some red dots scattered around the rotating sphere that she ascertained were the different bases of the company. For the next 45 minutes, Xander simulated a future missions briefing, giving them a full scenario with random partner and role assignments. In this case, the 6 were pretending to sweep a hotel floor. On the three-dimensional projector, a see-through schematic of the hotel showed assumed figures of themselves, as well as potential bogeys, hostages, and civilians backlit in different colors. On her own individual screen, Liz could see her personal assignment in 2 dimensions, with a map leading to a presumed checkpoint and safety zones. After all 6 of them seemed to understand the program and how to operate their individual tablets, including Kent, who seemed awestruck at first glance, Xander led the squad out the door of their training room and into the hallway, first taking them over to a large weapons closet stocked with more types of firearms than Liz imagined existed in the entirety of the United Kingdom. Beside these were less mechanical weapons, such as swords, spears, and throwing knives, the last of which Emma seemed keen to get her hands on. Finally, Xander led them to a secluded section of the training floor, where thousands of cubes had arranged themselves into a series of ancient runes. "Whoa!" Kent exclaimed, realizing what Liz had at the start of their session with the capability of the cubes. "Each one of these is specifically and actively programmed by a technician on the bay floor," Xander stated, pointing to a blank stretch of black wall where Liz presumed sat an invisible window. "On the floor, each of these will be outfitted to physically portray out expected mission field. If we need a factory, we'll get a factory. If we need a compound, we'll get a compound. If we need obstacles..." He turned to face the window again and spoke into his black wristband. 612, Golf, 612. "Copy," said a voice from his wrist. "Hostile inbound." From behind one of the ruins, a fully grown man appeared holding a pulled grenade. All of them except Xander took a surprised step back. Looking unfazed, Xander brandished a pistol from the small of his back, and without warning them, fired it directly in the man's face. "Jesus!" Kent vocalized for all of them. Even Johnny seemed stunned enough by the sudden gunfire he didn't turn to glare at Kent. Liz's heart rate had tripled. "Don't worry," Xander jostled arrogantly, firing another shot without warning into the man's still body for good measure. "Had I not pulled the trigger, we would be in as much danger as if he were real." Liz, even knowing the thing was staged, was struggling to trick her eyes. The man, constructed entirely of cubes, seemed to blend so well with his surroundings that she was struggling to find a fault in the edges of his body. The face was completely obliterated from the first gunshot. What looked like real blood was dripping from both wounds and pooling underneath on the stone floor. Even the smell was convincing. Liz felt her face turning white and wondered how long she could outlast her stomach. "What happens if we get shot by one of the bogeys?" Johnny uttered. Without warning, Xander turned on a dime and shot Johnny straight in the arm. They all froze. Emma even screamed. Johnny's face was contorted and his jaw clenched tight, breathing quickly and appearing to try and find something to keep himself from passing out. In a handful of seconds that felt like an eternity, Johnny finally opened his eyes, which were bloodshot and filled to the brim with pain tears. He was biting his tongue so hard, Liz was shocked it hadn't been bitten off. That's when she noticed his arm. Johnny had immediately clutched it with his other hand, but as he pulled it away, finally catching his breath, there was nothing there. No bullet hole, no open wound, not even a bruise. It was as though the entire thing had happened in their heads. "That hurts," Johnny grimaced. Xander just smiled menacingly. "If you get hit," he said, "you'll know." Johnny managed a slight whimper on one side of his crooked mouth. "I wouldn't recommend it." Emma and Margot laughed, and Liz felt slightly relieved. Kent and Jordan both remained wide-eyed and alert, suddenly distrustful of the adult who was tasked with keeping them alive. Xander started backing away from them slowly, his handgun having disappeared behind his back again. They all looked at him nervously. Margot started. "You're not going to shoot the rest of us, are you?" A harrowing grin crept across the leader's face. "I'm not." Xander disappeared behind a nearby bush as all around them a ring of armed assailants arose from nothingness out of the ground, each armed with a set of unorthodox weaponry. The large bearded thing in front of Liz brandished a pair of arm-length sabers. "Jordan, how many?" Emma squealed somewhere behind her. 20, maybe? Jordan stumbled nervously. "They're not real. It's hard for me to tell." "Liz, you're the only one with weapons," Johnny muttered. She'd been thinking the exact same thing. The six were shoulder to shoulder, their backs to one another in a reverse huddle. The men were closing in. It appeared that more and more were rising behind them. "Someone tell me what to do," she begged. "I can help," Margot said. "I don't know how effective it'll be, but I'll try." "On my signal," Johnny took charge, the men now just meters away. "If you can fight a hole, we can try to—" "Screw that," Ken budged beside Liz. "Kent, no!" She couldn't see exactly what happened, but Kent appeared to stumble face first as he initiated his speed from the circle. Johnny's arms were extended as she turned to look, not sure whether he had pushed him or tried to grab him, but Kent bolted his way through the layer of assailants before collapsing hard onto the ground. He dove face first into the ruined wall, having just enough awareness to tuck his neck before contact. He rolled hard against the ruins, and a loud crack echoed around the entirety of the training hall. Liz knew it wasn't the cubes that had made that sound. "Concord!" Xander yelled, sprinting from the bushes. The men collapsed back onto the floor like a wave under the stone surface. Kent was screaming, clutching his left leg. A collective groan emitted from the others as they saw quite plainly how real his injury was compared to Johnny's. Kent's lower leg was dangling to one side, very much broken in half. "I need a medic in Sector 112, Xander spoke to his wrist urgently. "Broken tibia, immediate medical attention." Kent's face was swelling like a red balloon, his eyes dripping with tears. The most rapid succession of cuss words flowed from his unintelligible mouth before he finally managed to squeak, "What the hell did you do that for?" Johnny looked taken aback. "Kent, he was trying to help you," Emma defended. "He tripped me," Kent shouted, still screaming between his accusations. You broke my leg." "Kent, he didn't do it on purpose," Margot agreed. "Liz, you saw it," Jordan teamed. "Tell him." Liz was too distracted by the state of Kent to even process what she'd seen. A pair of gloved paramedics ran onto the floor and attempted to lift Kent onto a medical trolley. Kent continued to howl, now paying the rest zero attention as he was wheeled off in agony toward the nearest lift. Xander looked furious. "Johnny, what happened?" he boiled. He tried to run through them, and I tried to stop him," Johnny muttered defensively. "He was going to abandon us. I thought—" He paused, trying to figure an appropriate statement. I thought we'd be better off altogether." Xander took this into consideration, but did not answer. Kent's howling was now echoing through the building. Other squads noticed, stopping their own exercises to look at the source of the noise. "Training's done for today," he glared. "Go get changed. Eat something. I'll meet you all in the common room after." They needed no second instructions. Whether Xander was frustrated with himself, Johnny, or all of them collectively, they could not tell. Wordlessly, they hustled off to the dressing room. Liz didn't even care to turn around while in her pants. Dinner remained silent. Back in the great hall of the school, the buzz of other students encircled their table like an unwanted swarm of insects. On any other night, the prospect of New England lobster feast would have been amongst the most delicious things she could possibly think of, but with their collective thoughts still centered around Kent, there was no interest in bringing the lemon-tinged tail to her mouth, and despite her best efforts, expected to wake up starving the next morning. Xander was waiting for them in the living room, still dressed in the same outfit from training. "Get comfy," he said when they returned. "Go take a shower. Put on pajamas. Come back out here. We might be here a while." They did as they were told. Not worrying to flatten her brushy hair after the shower, Liz returned downstairs with a lazy ponytail. A tartan set of pajamas adorned her tired legs, and she was surprised to find Emma dressed in very much the same way. "Take a seat," he instructed when they had all returned afresh. Xander took a deep breath, looking a bit calmer than he had just an hour before. "I've been reviewing the footage," he said, pausing in a more dramatic fashion than he probably intended. "You guys are right. Johnny tried to grab him and he pulled away, but if one person's at fault, it's him." He held up a finger as if to interrupt himself. "But I do not want anyone to stress that information on him." "But," Emma started. "Truth or not," Xander said, "it doesn't matter. You should know better than anyone, Emma. This is about politics and optics. That kid knows no one. That kid trusts no one. He was taken from his home because of something that made him special, and now he doesn't even have that." He looked sullenly around at their faces. "I'd be surprised if he's able to run like that again by the end of the year." Xander's eyes intensified. "You all have each other. Even you, Liz, you know the system. He doesn't. He's as out of water as it is possible to be right now, and he needs all of you to help him through that. He circled them again, reading their understanding. Now, to your merit, you all did everything right. Johnny, you took charge. The rest of you took responsibility. Up until he fell, you did everything perfectly. And even what you attempted to do shows an incredible sense of devotion to each other and to your capabilities. You're still the dream team, speedster or not. I won't lie and say today wasn't a bit of a setback. I don't know if what was on the table will still be there by next week. I'm not asking you all to perform at a level beyond which you're comfortable, but I do need to know if you can continue to have each other's backs the way you did today, even including Kent. I need you to trust each other. I need you to trust him. He paused, a slight grin crawling across his face. I need you to trust me, even if I do shoot you in the arm. Johnny smiled back. It's okay. When did you stop noticing? Xander asked to prove a point. Hard to focus on that when someone else is in real pain, Johnny admitted. Shouldn't last more than a few minutes, Xander claimed. You're never in any real danger in there unless you do it to yourself. His face darkened. We need to get him to learn that too. Now, Kent's on his way back from the medical center as we speak. Obviously, he can't take the stairs, and obviously his bedroom's upstairs. So, your new mission from me. He leaned in to accentuate. Help him. Whatever you have to do, whatever favors he might need, help him. You're in charge. You're his squad mates. Help him with food, help him down the stairs, help him to and from school. Whatever you have to do, help him. He stated this conclusively, and none of them argued. With the simple but profound instruction to Johnny to stay away from them that evening on behalf of Kent's current state of mind, the rest of them waited only a few minutes for Kent to arrive, now in a cast and crutches, aided through the door by a different pair of paramedics. The mood was awkward. The girl stepped aside. Kent looked absolutely furious. Xander and Jordan managed to carry Kent all the way up to his room, where they managed to get him settled and offer him food before returning downstairs to regroup with Johnny and the girls. One last time, Xander accentuated his expectations of their aid over the following days and weeks, before he joined the paramedics in leaving the kids be. An awkward silence fell over the five, before all decided that the day had been long enough, and finally resorted to climbing into their beds. Up the stairs, Liz figured she'd offer a nighttime courtesy of saying goodnight to Kent. Expecting another two-word answer, she knocked on his door and found it unlocked. Yes? He shouted from the other side. She opened the door slightly, not peeking inside, but making her voice more audible to the room's occupant. I was going to go to bed, she said kindly. Need anything before I do? Oh, Kent grumbled in a muted, pained voice. I don't think so. Maybe tomorrow. All right, she said awkwardly. Sorry about today. I'm next door if you need to talk. Good night. There was no answer before she shut the door behind her. Maybe tomorrow, he had said. Liz looked around at the empty landing, finding herself the only probable occupant for the next several weeks. Trust each other, had been Xander's words. But the others were locked away downstairs, together, in their own little world. Just because she knew the system didn't mean she was an outsider to this place the same way Kent was. She was alone up here with him, and no one else. With a sense of dread as she crawled into bed, Liz wondered if she could trust the others, or if she had just unintentionally signed herself up to a neighbor's service for the next several weeks.